Welcome to the Explainer. So I want you to picture this. It's the dead of night on a completely deserted highway. The wind is just howling, whipping dust everywhere. And sitting out there, literally in the middle of nowhere, is this old, isolated roadside dhaba. It's got a crooked roof, and there's just this one flickering yellow bulb that looks like it's going to die at any second. Inside, you've got a few truck drivers and laborers huddled around sipping hot ginger tea, just trying to stay warm. But tonight, the vibe is completely off. It is dead quiet, it's tense. And that's because the absolute life of the party, this guy everyone knows as Harish Chacha, is completely missing. And he has been for 3 whole days.
Okay, let's dive into this mystery, right? Because this is the question that sets the whole thing in motion. Harish Chacha was a total fixture at this dhaba. He was the guy who told these terrifying midnight ghost stories. But his bench has been empty for days. And what makes it so incredibly creepy is that the owner specifically remembers pouring him a glass of tea the very night he vanished, leaving it right on his chair. And by morning, the glass was totally empty. So now everyone's whispering, is he sick? Or, did something much worse happen?
So just as everyone is totally freaking out, a cold blast of air sweeps through the door, and out of the pitch-black night, a figure steps inside. It's Harish. But something is really, really wrong. His face is completely pale, like all the blood has been drained out of him. And he's got this super unsettling gleam in his eyes, like he's just seen something that's not from this world. He walks in, and all you hear is the slow, rhythmic thack of his walking stick. When the guys nervously ask him where he's been, he just calmly says he was hanging out with a friend named Rajpal down at the old highway bend, which, by the way, is a spot all the locals swear is haunted.
Harish sits down, someone quickly puts a fresh glass of steaming tea in front of him, but he doesn't even touch it. He just stares blankly into the steam. He casually mentions that he was delayed because his friend at the haunted bend had a lot to talk about. The whole room just goes completely silent. And then, from the dark highway outside, another sound echoes. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It's the unmistakable sound of a second walking stick coming toward the door. Harish doesn't even flinch. He just sits perfectly still and mutters, looks like he has arrived too. I mean, the guys in the dhaba are absolutely frozen in fear.
The tension is literally unbearable. So to break it, one of the terrified laborers begs Harish to just tell one of his stories, anything to distract him. And this is where the creator pulls off an absolute masterclass of a narrative bait and switch. They hook us with all the classic ghost story stuff, right? The isolated diner, the ghost on the highway, the creepy knocking. But when Harish opens his mouth, he doesn't talk about ghosts or demons at all. He completely pivots. He starts talking about his youth. He turns this terrifying supernatural setup into a really profound, deeply heartbreaking look at the real-world horrors of extreme poverty and broken relationships.
All right, moving into part 1, those difficult days of youth, a flashback to reality.
Let's slow down here, because the tone shifts so dramatically. We go from spooky to incredibly empathetic. Harish takes us back to the early days of his marriage, and let me tell you, this was not some romantic, rustic fairy tale. It was brutal. He talks about having literally only 2 coins to his name. Imagine his young, newlywed bride sitting under a leaking roof during a massive rainstorm, staring at totally empty cooking pots in a mud house. Harish would spend the entire day desperately searching for wage labor, and a lot of times he'd come home with absolutely nothing. At first, his wife didn't complain. She hid her hunger and she hid her tears.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the profound realization that comes out of it. There's a line that says, poverty doesn't just burn the stomach, it burns relationships. And wow, does that hit hard. Harish looks back on those agonizing days and realizes that financial desperation isn't just about physical starvation. It creates this emotional furnace, The constant panic of survival, the deep shame of providing nothing, the unspoken resentment. It just chips away at trust. It leaves both partners completely exhausted and incredibly fragile.
Which leads us to part 2, maternal home and taunts, when desires clash with reality.
So, that fragility we just talked about, it gets pushed to the absolute breaking point. The Festival of Holi is coming up, and while everyone else is getting ready to celebrate, it's just a dark cloud over Harish's home. His wife is young, she's seeing all the other women in the village get new saris and good food, and she desperately wants that too. Totally understandable, right? So she gives Harish an ultimatum. She demands money for the festival, but Harish literally has empty pockets. He's begging her to understand, but the pressure is just too intense. The lack of basic needs violently crashes into her desires, and they get into a massive fight. The shouting gets so bad that she drops the ultimate threat. She's going to leave him and go back to her maternal home, her Micah. Blinded by shame and his own anger, Harish just yells at her to leave, and she actually does. She walks right out into the dark.
Let's map this out and see how this builds, because it's a fascinating psychological shift. Day 1 at her mother's house is great. It's exactly what she wanted. Comfort, food, her mother's love. But by day 3, the vibe completely changes. They tell her to rest and not to do chores, which actually makes her feel like a guest, like a stranger in her own childhood home. By week 1, the reality of a small, gossipy village really sets in. Why are you still here? When is your husband coming? And those gentle questions quickly turn into really sharp, nasty taunts from the village women. She realizes this isn't a refuge for a runaway wife. By the final night, she hits a massive wall of realization about where she actually belongs.
And that realization leads to this incredibly powerful insight. Taunts burn the soul more than hunger burns the stomach. This is huge. Harsh's wife realizes that, yeah, starving with Harsh was awful, but it was actually way easier to handle than this agonizing social isolation, the whispers, and the piercing taunts from her own people. The hunger in her stomach was a struggle she shared with her husband, but the pain in her soul at her maternal home, that was a totally lonely, unbearable burden.
And that brings us to the final act, the true ghosts, defeating poverty and ego.
This is where everything clicks. The story at the Dhaba hits its emotional climax. We pivot away from the pain of their separation and focus on something much bigger: reconciliation. The creator brilliantly reveals the real villain of the story. It wasn't some supernatural ghoul on a dark highway. The real monster was ego, ahankar. It was the destructive pride that made a wife abandon her entire life just because one material desire wasn't met. And just as much, it was the stubborn male ego that made a husband stand there and watch his wife walk out into a dangerous night, rather than just swallow his pride and beg her to stay. Ego was the ghost that possessed them.
But here is the beautiful part. They fight back. And the way they rebuild their home is simple but incredibly hard to do. Step 1, the wife swallows her pride, picks up her stuff, and walks all the way back through the dark village completely alone. Step 2, Harish, who has basically been staring at the front door every single night, hears this gentle, trembling knock. And step 3, this is absolutely crucial. When he opens the door, there's no anger. He doesn't say, "I told you so." There are no taunts, just tears, mutual apologies, and deep forgiveness. They literally left their ego outside that door for good.
And because they managed to survive this incredible emotional test, their luck actually turns around. A new highway construction project opens up nearby, and Harish finally gets steady daily wages. Those empty pots get filled. The cold stove gets lit again. And when Holi finally arrives, they celebrate it with so much joy. Sure, they hardly have any colored powder, and no, she doesn't get a brand new sari, but they are happier than ever because they finally understand what their partnership actually means.
So, the crucial point we take away from this is pretty profound. What started as a scary campfire story gives us these solid life truths. Ego will absolutely destroy a home faster than an empty bank account ever could. The societal judgment and the taunts we face when relationships break down, way sharper than physical hunger. And at the end of the day, true partnership isn't about perfectly checking off every single desire. It's about deep, resilient empathy. It's about weathering the absolute worst storms together.
As Harish finishes talking, the guys in the Dhaba realize something crazy. They've completely forgotten about that creepy knocking outside. The supernatural terror is just gone, totally replaced by this deep respect for the real trials of life. Which leaves us with a really provocative question to think about. Can a scary story give life's biggest lesson? I mean, the next time you feel a chill in your own relationships, maybe ask yourself, are you actually fighting the real problems, or are you just letting the invisible ghost of your own ego haunt your home? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.